Get ready to find your recipe for a successful real estate lifestyle from America's top expert here at Greenlight REI with your host, Lance Edwards.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this session, this podcast of Greenlight REI, where we teach you and share with you the recipe for the successful real estate lifestyle. And we got a special guest for today, absolutely unique and amazing man, Mr. Larry Pino. And I'll tell you a little bit about his background. And I've only got limited time here, so I have to give you the Cliff Notes version because he's truly unique in what he's done. He's first of all, from an entrepreneurial stand-up, he's been involved in the startup of some 70 to 80 businesses over his career. He is, like you would call, a serial entrepreneur, but he's taken one of these enterprises from zero to $250 million a year revenue in a short 7-year time span. All of his startups have been from scratch, which is most people, that subscribe with Greenlight REI here. And at the same time, besides being a very successful entrepreneur and very even active today, he's also a very successful real estate attorney. And he brings a very, very unique combination of the legalistic side of things as well as the entrepreneurial side of things. I've known this man for a number of years. He's actually my attorney, and he is a incredible resource in the field of real estate. And another topic which we talk about today, really the focus is on raising private money. As a securities attorney, Larry's not only on the legal side of it, he's out there doing it with some major projects. So with that, Larry, I want to welcome you to Greenlight REI.
Lance, delighted to be here and can't wait to be on your podcast. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, super. And, Larry, the number one question that I receive from people looking to get started or involved or just getting involved with real estate or any entrepreneurial venture, certainly a startup for that matter, is where do I get the money? I don't have all the personal financial resources to do this X project, this venture. Where do I get the money? So maybe this would cover a broad question, but how would you speak to that, having started up 70 to 80 of yourselves? How do you address this money question?
Yeah, I can start at answering that any number of ways, but I will tell you that first and foremost, virtually every business in the early years that I ever started, in real estate or whatever, it was a combination of strategies of other people's money. And by other people's money, I don't necessarily mean investors. I'm talking about other people's money, like, for example, leveraging options on real estate rather than contracts that require down payments. For example, I put in one of my very first properties was an historical building in downtown Orlando, and I had no money. So I took an option to buy the property and with the right to renovate it in the meantime. And so I put all of the money that I had available, and I'll talk about where I got that money in a second, but I had all the money that I could make available. I put it into the remodeling job for the real estate. And then once it was remodeled, I went to the bank with an MAI appraisal, and I borrowed against the MAI appraisal, which gave me the opportunity to buy the property and to get all of my renovation dollars back. So that's what I mean by using other people's money, leveraging it as much as I can. Bought a restaurant, for example, where in buying the restaurant had shut down, and the owner of the restaurant owned the real estate, owned the restaurant, owned the fixtures and the equipment. And that's all I did is I didn't buy the restaurant. I just executed a lease on renting the restaurant from him for whatever the monthly fee was. And I was in business overnight for nothing other than a couple months rent. 1 month of security deposit and the first month of rent, and that was it. Other than, and I could kind of go on and on about examples of that, but the bottom line is you're leveraging OPM, you're leveraging sources of identifying how you can leverage that type of money from the outside into something you're doing. Other than that, I got to tell you, there was a time in which I collected more credit cards than, what's the old adage, than Carter has pills. I had more credit cards. I had boxes of credit cards. Anybody who was willing to send me a credit card, man, I took it because I survived by credit cards and putting things on credit cards. And, you're making monthly payments and you don't ever want them to go delinquent. So you're just making monthly payments, and it's expensive money if you're making monthly payments. But if you don't have the capital, it's the only place you can go, because it does allow you. And the interesting thing about our system, even now that we have experienced the recession, now everybody is back all over again, issuing credit cards. Man, if you've got a credit card, 10 credit cards, 15 credit cards, and you're making monthly payments on them so that they're not delinquent, you're going to be getting invitations for more credit cards. But I mean, there was one point in time that I really looked at it and viewed all of these credit card balances that I had, and I described it, in events and in my speaking engagements as running up the national debt, because that's what I used to bootstrap my businesses. And candidly, that's what so many either business entrepreneurs or real estate entrepreneurs end up doing, is to be able to do that. Now, if you do that, then of course your next category up is going to be friends and family. And that's a whole different conversation, but that's pretty much, leverage number one, as best as you can, credit cards number two. And then once you're doing both of those so that you're limiting the amount that you need to deploy, and you're using the credit cards to deploy it, then to the extent that you have friends and family, give them a solid deal, give them as much security as possible, and then you're now off and running into that level.
All right, let me pause right there, because I want to talk about that. Before we do, one area I want to talk about in regards to OPM is the area of seller financing. And of course, we're very bullish on that. Can you speak some about seller financing and wisdom there or experiences you can share, Larry?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, literally all of my properties were seller financed, all of them. Every piece of real estate, I think that for my first 5 years, 10 years, every piece of real estate was always a seller financed. I never, that's obviously a form of OPM, and it obviously does it without it works without institutional constraints. So there were times, and in the very beginning, I'll just simply tell you this, because I didn't know what the outer boundaries were, if you will, for what was acceptable, I was testing out the outer boundaries. So I would put out, I'd put out offers left and right. And they all had different terms. They were all seller financed. Some were just monthly payments. Some I gave them two different notes constructed in two different ways. Half of it with a monthly payment. The other half would be one lump sum at a future point, 7 years from now, for example. But they were two different notes, so they had two different maturities attached to them, and so forth and so on. So number one, yes, absolutely. You'd always want to try for seller financing. And number two, there are any number of variations, and somebody would need to take one of your courses to see all the different variations on the theme, but I always incorporated them. One of the strategies that I used substantially is always seller financing on the buy, and when I ended up selling real estate, I'd always sell it on a wrap. So I would wrap the underlying seller finance, take low down payment, but a very significant arbitrage in terms of both the amount that I would sell it for, because people buy terms, they don't buy price. So if I buy for $250,000 and I sell it, a year and a half later for $295,000, what's relevant to the buyer is how much I want down. And if I give them that wrap mortgage, if my underlying interest rate is 6% and I'm now wrapping it at 8%, I've got a full 2% arbitrage on all of the capital, in addition to, of course, the 8% on the capital that I have integrated into the profit that I've got. So yeah, there are any number of combinations of ways to structure that, which again takes a course like one of the courses that you teach. But yes, seller financing, absolutely, with any type of number of liberal terms, obviously gets you by far the best leverage deal than anything else out there. And that holds true, by the way, even today. The economics might be different. The interest rates are certainly different than they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. but the reality is the structure is the same.
All right, perfect. So let's go back to friends and family. Let's take a scenario. Let's say you've got a seller to agree to 85% seller financing, 90% for that matter, but you still got to have a cash down payment. For an individual getting started, you're starting to lose to family and friends. What can they do? And also we got to talk about what's allowed inbounds and out of bounds. What can they do with regards to raising the cash for the down payment portion, or the rehab for that matter?
When you're dealing with a transaction, almost inevitably, and you're dealing with somebody who's a friend and family, you're pretty much outside the contours of securities laws. You don't have to worry about securities laws. I know that people get scared about that, but the truth is, when you're now soliciting investments that you're going to pool inside a particular investment. I'm going to take your money, your 5,000 or 10,000, somebody else's 10,000, somebody else's 10,000, and you're going to pool it. Now we may have a conversation about, are you potentially in violation of securities laws, right? But when you have a piece of real estate and there's a difference between the amount that you have to come up with and the amount of the seller, or the purchase price and the amount of the seller financing, and you're solving for that gap could be $20,000 or that gap could be $50,000. But if that's what you're solving for, that's a very easy solve, because what you're going to end up doing is it's a transaction. You're going to try to bring in as few people as possible. So it's not going to be broad-based. They're not going to really give you the money unless they know who you are. So you're talking about somebody that you have an internal relationship with, which is why it's called the friends and family round, right? And you have the ability to secure them, because there is no reason whatsoever that you would not give them a second mortgage. You would give them, you can structure it any way you want. You can structure it with an LLC, and that LLC has a second mortgage if you don't want their name on it. But the bottom line is, it is a secured investment in the real estate. So you borrow that money. That money might show a promissory note, but that promissory note is to an LLC, and you're going to give them, the interest rate is, let's say, 8%, but to the LLC. But that LLC, inside of that, you're going to also give them ups. You're going to give them a percentage of the ups when you sell the property. So it's a very simple way to secure them on the one side and to identify for them the opportunity to get more than just simply the interest rate in the process.
All right, so let me recap here, because this is the big one, people. So if you're dealing with friends and family, you have a relationship with them, then with regards to concerns over the security laws, really, and I'm not the attorney, maybe I can't say, well, I guess I can say whatever I want, but there's no real concern here with regards to security laws. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. I mean, first of all, typically when you're dealing with friends and family, it's not a securities issue. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about the actual securities laws. There is an overriding consideration, right? Overriding common law, and it's also underlying securities, which basically says, I can't lie to you, I can't cheat you, I can't defraud you. So when I say it's outside securities, that's not to suggest that it's, everything is fair game. No, it's not. You have to deal honestly with people. You have to deal in a trustworthy fashion and so forth. But with respect to the implications of, is this something you have to register as a security? Is this something that you have to get an exemption from registration for? If you're dealing with a building, so you're dealing with a transaction, and you're identifying particular individuals that are relatively limited in number and that you already have a prior relationship with, you're outside securities. There's no state or federal agency, if you will, that's going to be concerned about that transaction. Okay.
All right. So let's start talking about the boundaries then. Let's say you're getting outside of friends and family and you're looking, typically for larger projects. I suppose I can go to the Houston Chronicle this morning or the Orlando Sentinel where you are, and there's probably in the classified section some ad somebody's running on how to raise, or looking to raise private investors. what are the rules? And this is the big question I always get. What are the rules with regards to the Security and Exchange Commission? And to the extent we can answer this in the time period we have, what can you say about that, Larry?
Sure. So let's talk about, first of all, it's never really going to be at the level that we're talking about right now. I'm just, for example, finishing a Reg A. A Reg A Plus, which is a $50 million Reg A. Now, that's a security that is actually right now being reviewed by the SEC. They're doing their second round of review comments on our registration, our Reg A. That's SEC. But for that one Reg A, I'll do a dozen Reg Ds. What a Reg D is a limited investment offering. It could be 25 million, but it's based on an exemption to registration. It's not based on an actual registration. Reg A is a registration. Reg D is exemptions from registration. And with a Reg D, which is what you're probably familiar with, Lance, there are the two types. I have a Reg D exemption, which allows me to raise money from accredited investors and up to 35 non-accredited investors, right? The big caveat, however, for that particular type of Reg D exemption, which is called a 506B, small b, the caveat for that is that I had to have had a prior relationship with those people. So in a sense, it's kind of like friends and family plus. So it's anybody that I've ever done business with, anybody that I have a relationship with. What does that mean? It means that you weren't using the security to meet them for the first time. You have to have a prior relationship with them. If you do, you can contact them about your investment. If they're accredited, there's no limit to how many accredited investors you can have. And you can have up to 35 non-accredited investors. So for a typical small apartment that one of your students might be funding, 506B works just fine. As a matter of fact, if they're dealing with accredited investors, you don't even necessarily need that. There's an accredited investor exemption. So let's say small apartment building, you need $500,000 and you got 5 to 10 people that can put up that $500,000 for you. And you know that they're accredited, which as you know is $1 million that they've got in investment dollars, not including their house, or income of $250,000 a year for 2 years with the expectation of that amount this year, right? So you know them to be accredited. You can just do an accredited exemption, accredited investor exemption, which really is nothing more than a document that says that these guys are accredited and that you have provided them with, and you just write up what the terms of the deal are, and you share with them any financials that you've got on that building, and that is sufficient. No more muss and fuss. You don't have to do anything else. So if that's what you're looking for, the accredited investor exemption is by far the easiest of all of them to do. The only caveat, of course, is you have to know the accredited investors. So you have to be in some type of network where you're exposed to them. All right. Everything that I've now talked about, accredited investor number 1, 506B number 2, those have to have relationships attached to them. You can't go advertise for them. Okay? Now, after the Jobs Act, there was this thing called the 506C, not B, but C. The difference between the two is that a 506C allows you to now go advertise. So if you have an offering, you want to raise $1 million, and you don't know $1 million worth of people, right? You just don't. So I'm going to have to advertise. I'm going to have to put a classified ad in the newspaper, and I'm going to advertise for investors in my project. That would be an exemption, but it's called a 506C exemption. And that would require you to limit it strictly to accredited investors. So you would put in your classified ad, limited to accredited investors only. And then you would give them a disclosure that gives them all the information about the investment. And it doesn't matter that you'd have no idea who they were. You could advertise publicly. They could meet you for the very first time based on calling in response to that ad, and you're perfectly okay. So you have accredited investor exemption, but they have to know who you are. You have a 506B, have to know who you are, or you can advertise, in which case it's a 506C.
Perfect. That's the most concise explanation I've ever heard when asked an attorney what are the rules, Larry. That was perfect. So, all right. So let's stay in this space. We got exemptions. So to do this, I take it you're going to be running. Anytime you're going to advertise, you still need to have legal counsel involved in this process, even though they're exemptions. Is that? Let's talk about how to do it properly. How do you do that?
Let me say this. I don't know whether you necessarily have to have legal counsel. You have to know what you're doing. So whether you have legal counsel that makes sure that you know what you're doing, or you know what you're doing because you've done it once or twice and you now know what you're doing on your own, either way, but you do need to know what you're doing. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let's talk about another area that comes up. So people ask, they hear about PPMs, private placement memorandums. So what is a PPM and how does that fit into this process and the rules we're talking about?
Okay, so a PPM is really what I was referring to when I talk about a disclosure document. And the disclosure document is equal to the breadth of the offering. So, for example, if I need 5 accredited investors that are each going to put up $50,000 for a $250,000 investment, I still need to disclose to them. But do I need a full-blown PPM? No, because number one, they're accredited. It's limited in its scope. But what you do need to do is you need to disclose. So it's, here's who I am. Here's what this investment is all about. Here are the financials. Here is my pro forma. And based on that, here are the terms that I'm offering you as an investor. Now, that document might be, besides the attachments of the financials, that document might be, 10 pages long. That's it, 8 pages long. Because you've given them all the information. So what's the rationale on that? It's an accredited investor exemption. So what's the rationale? Well, these guys are accredited to begin with. So they're not babes in the woods. So give them what they need to know, and that's an adequate disclosure. Tell the truth. Tell them what they're going to get on this thing, and that's sufficient, right? So, but that is basically a PPM. Whether you call it a PPM or you call it a confidential disclosure doesn't make any difference at all. It could be called an offering circular. It could be called a PPM. It could be called a disclosure statement, whatever you want to call it. But what it is the document, it's the disclosures of the information about that real estate that you want them to invest in and about yourself. Okay. Now, as I now go up in complexity, the document becomes more substantial. So if I'm going to do a $5 million offering, and I'm going to buy 1 apartment building, or I'm going to buy 3 apartment buildings in town, I'm going to buy historicals and I'm going to convert them. Or any one of those things. So let's just say it's a $5 million offering. Okay, same concept. You still need to disclose. But now you're probably talking about something that's going to fit into one of those 2 other categories, either a 506B or a 506C. Going to, on the one hand, people that you know, or on the other hand, people that you're meeting for the first time. So same concept. The only difference is now the disclosures are going to become more substantial, because you're now going to want to say, okay, I'm now not just dealing with accredited investors, because I have the right to get 35 non-accredited investors involved in my deal. So I'm probably now going to have to start disclosing things that I wouldn't if the person sitting across from me were a sophisticated investor. So I'm going to say, hey, you're dealing with what? Risk that this could possibly be contaminated real estate. Risk that this could be asbestos. Risk that there might be black mold. Risk that, the sky caves in. So I'm now going to put a whole bunch of risk disclosures into a document. But frankly, the rest of the document is the same as the first one I talked about. Here's who I am. Here's what I'm going to be doing with your investment dollars. Here's how you're going to get paid. Here's anything that I think you need to know about the deal. And oh, by the way, here are 6 pages of risks that you might have, because I might get hit by a car walking across the street and I don't have insurance. I mean, those are all the risks that you put in as risk disclosures. So going back to your question, what is a PPM? A PPM is nothing other than a glorified disclosure document that increases in its sophistication based on the level of sophistication that the offering requires.
All right, perfect. All right, one more question, because so we've talked about what's allowed, the different forms. The other very popular question, and this is somewhat of an open-ended question, is, okay, what return expectations, or what return should I be paying? What should I be offering my investor? What are the expectations? And so, I recognize there's different flavors, obviously, of this, Larry. How can you speak to that question? What kind of return should we be paying?
I can't necessarily give you an answer, but I can certainly give you parameters.
Okay.
So in evaluating parameters, first of all asset classes have different risk-reward relationships, right? So you take a piece of real estate as opposed to a building. A piece of real estate as opposed to a business. Well, those are two obviously very different risk-reward ratios. So obviously much higher expectation in terms of expected return on a business than you're going to have on real estate. So now let's eliminate business and let's now just talk about real estate. Well, even within the context of real estate, there are different types of real estate. So you have office building, you have a shopping center, you have a freestander, you have mine, assisted living. So when we talk about the different types of real estate, the type of real estate that you're involved in is also going to have its expected return on a risk-adjusted basis that's going to be more or less in the ballpark for what people are investing with that type of expected return. In addition, third category, let's still talk about real estate. We talk about the type of real estate, but what about the condition of the real estate? We're just dealing with, we're checking out an office building in downtown Orlando, and they want some ridiculous cap rate. It's kind of like a 4.5%, not even, like 4% cap rate. And it's not like they have as a tenant SunTrust. What they're dealing with, a bank, they have some like local, some local company that's a tenant. Well, I can't exactly say that they're credit-worthy triple net lease tenant that justifies a 4% cap rate. That's closer to an 8 or 9% cap rate, right? So the condition of the real estate would also make a determination. That's one of the reasons why, for example, I don't know, Walgreens, of course. I mean, I've got a friend who just did whopping number of Walgreens developments, goes in, gets a site, has Walgreens as a tenant, and it's kind of like, oh man, go to the bank, borrow the money, and you never have to worry about the equity. He'll get all the equity he needs to be able to, because he got Walgreens as a tenant on the other side, right? Creditworthy and clearly a triple net. So the condition of the real estate also matters in terms of what the adjusted risk is going to look like. And finally, I would just simply say, in addition to the condition, I would also just simply talk about infrastructure. Are we actually talking about a piece of real estate that has to be either remodeled or construction has to be finished? Or are we talking about one that's camera ready? I mean, it's all set to go. The only risk that you've got is risk of finding a tenant. as opposed to, oh, I have to finish it off. I have to get it CO'd before I go out and try to find tenants that are in it. So all of those factor into what the risk-adjusted return is that somebody's going to want on the investment side. Now, with all that said, in terms of parameters, it's very broad. In my world, a cap rate is really just whatever the expected return is in inverse, right? So if we're talking, we would be expecting that the rate of return in our business, right? An expected rate of return is going to be more or less in the ballpark of a 12 to 18% rate of return with respect to invested dollars. Now, that's complex real estate. It's assisted living, memory care. Why do I say that? Because it's not just real estate. It's real estate that's housing an operating business, taking care of seniors. Mm-hmm. And so the expectation increases that expected rate of return because the risks are both risks of real estate plus the risks of the underlying business taking care of seniors. If what you've got is single story, or you have an apartment building in a just a well-populated place that's relatively recent construction, may not necessarily be Class A, maybe it's Class B plus. In terms of real estate, it's got good track record in terms of occupancy. You're not dealing with 12 to 18% rate of returns. Your expectation of a rate of return is going to be, and you would know that area better than I would, Lance, because you do it every day, but it's going to be in a lower rate of return. That might be 10%, that might be 12%. Only other final comment that I'll tell you on that is it's also geographically relevant. So rate of return in California is very different than the rate of return in Illinois or in Indiana, and that's very different than the rate of return that's down here in Florida. So the geography, where you're actually doing your investments, I do securities pretty much around the country. And mm-hmm. I've noticed that the guy that's up there in Portland, Oregon, putting together a securities offering up there is very clearly looking at different rates of return than we're looking for here in Florida, or that California people, that clients of mine do in the offerings that they put together.
All right, very good. That's very good bracketing of all the attributes associated with it. All right, Larry, now you run a very thriving law practice. You have a number of clients, including myself. And for someone who might be interested in wanting to secure your services with regards to any aspect of their business needs or their security, private money needs, talk in terms of, what are you looking for with regards to clients, or if someone's interested in working with you, what are you looking for, and how do they contact you?
I've been fortunate, pretty much from day one. I've been fortunate primarily because, to me, law and business are seamless. So, whether I'm dealing with a legal issue or a business issue or a real estate issue, to me, it's all just one thing. It's all just part of the same considerations. And, it's kind of the elephant, right? You're just kind of like looking at it from different angles, depending upon what the subject is that you're discussing. So because of that, I've always had clients. But I will tell you that as I've gotten older, from the time that I first opened my practice in 1880 till the present, till the present time, right? I've also found that from a personal satisfaction standpoint, I'm not a retail lawyer. Somebody calls me up and say, hey, listen, I'd like to do a will. And it's like, can you do wills? Well, of course I can do a will. But I'm not going to do a will for somebody who's calling me up to do a will. I do a will along with an entire estate plan for a client, for their client's family. But it's because they're a client. So what I really look for is I look for a complete relationship with anybody that I do work with. And it's just really from a personal satisfaction standpoint, Lance. I want to know everything there is to know about that person's business. I want to know the financials. I want to know what they're doing. I want to know their history. I want to really understand it so that I can give them the best service that they deserve. So when they're calling me, they don't have to explain what their business is. I know what their business is. They don't have to explain what the issue is. I know what the issue is. And so now they're just telling me the circumstances. I had a call yesterday with a client in Texas too, by the way. And they will call me probably weekly. And it's going to be some type of particular personnel issue related to it, or it's a contractual related issue. But there's no introduction. I just know their business, and I've done all their documents. So I know the way it flows and all that. So I guess the short answer to the question is glad to be open for potential clients that emerge as either those individuals who listen to your podcast or are students or graduates of yours. But it really is intended to be a holistic relationship. I wouldn't want them to call me to see if I can close a piece of real estate for them, because that's probably not going to be, I'm not the right fit for that.
All right, fair enough. And give me your law site again so they know how to look you on the web.
Oh, it's Pino Nicholson. So it's Pino. Nicholson is Nicholson. Pino Nicholson. And then it's law, LAW. And the formal is PLLC. So if they just plug in Pino Nicholson, they will certainly find my website and they can read all about us.
Well, Larry, this has been fabulous. This is, I got to say, the most concise, to the point, effective summary with regards to raising private money, including yours truly, and certainly with regards to the SEC rules that I've ever heard, certainly spoken by an attorney. And I want to thank you just for everything that you were sharing here, because it's going to really help a lot of people. Thank you so much, Larry.
You're welcome. And I'll just simply offer, Lance, anytime you want to, this is fun and it's easy. And, I talk to you and you talk to me, which we do all the time anyway. So it's just real easy. But what I might want to say is, based on whatever feedback you get from your students, anytime you want to do a drill down in a particular subject area where we devote the entire podcast to just that particular subject so that I can get into the meat and potatoes of it, always glad to help. I sit here at my desk all day and do what I do. So glad to be available.
Be careful what you ask for, because I'm taking you up on that. We're gonna be
all right, fair enough.
That is more than generous. All right, so thank you again, Larry. And for everyone, we'll have the show notes posted. Remember, it's Pino Nicholson Law. If you are looking for a relationship with an outstanding attorney, an outstanding entrepreneur, and just an outstanding man, Larry Pino is your man. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. For the show notes and all the free training resources, make sure you check out greenlightreinvesting.com. That's greenlightreinvesting.com. Until the next Greenlight REI, look forward to hearing about your successes. Take care, everyone. Bye.
You've been listening to The Expert with Lance Edwards. Let us now blatantly and shamelessly bribe you toward creating your own real estate lifestyle by offering you a whole bunch of free stuff. Go to greenlightreinvesting.com and get you some free stuff and this session's show notes.